Hey, what's up, guys? Pastor Jim here, and I want to thank you for checking out today's message, which is part of a 2-week series called First Fruits. We're taking a look at what the Bible has to say about giving and our personal finances. It's my prayer that this content will be a blessing to you and your family. We consider content like this to be supplemental and not a replacement for community. If you live in the Savannah area and don't have a home church, then please consider visiting one of our locations. If this content blesses you and you'd like to know more about City Church or how to invest in the ministry, visit citychurch.life. And now, First Fruits.
Last Sunday, we did our emergency preparedness event, and it was a really great success. We offered the Stop the Bleed training, and we had a lot of people asking, like, this is really great, but we don't really have the tools to do this with us. And so the Pooler Fire Department we had been working with them. They're the ones that came and did the training, and they had already offered to allow the church to make a purchase of some emergency preparedness kits that are the same ones that they use with their EMS services, and they were letting us purchase those at wholesale. They have now extended that to our church family. And so if you are interested in owning either one of those emergency preparedness kits that you would have in case of an emergency, or just to simply have a tourniquet for the car, this is the tool that you would need if somebody were to be not just shot, but any type of bleeding that needs to be stopped on an appendage. You would need this to be able to stop the bleed. They're allowing us to purchase those for $22. They're normally $27. The kit they're allowing us to buy for $200, and they're normally $250, and that is their price extended. And so if you're interested in having any of these resources, my family is buying some, and I know that several of you have already asked and will be interested. You can sign up for that. We are doing pre-orders for those, and in a couple of weeks we'll place the order. It'll take a week or so to get here. We plan on having those before Christmas to get to you. But if you are in an emergency and you need to help somebody, you have to have the right tools to be able to do it. And so we want to extend that opportunity to you. Also, on December 8th, we're going to be offering CPR training and another Stop the Bleed training here at the church at 8 a.m. The cost on that is $15. You'll walk away with CPR certification as well as Stop the Bleed. And so that is December the 8th. So that's just around the corner, a couple of weeks out. Saturday in the morning at 8 a.m., come get the training. We have licensed professionals that'll be offering that. We really want to encourage those who work in our City Kids ministry to be a part of this. And if you volunteer in City Kids, we're actually going to help with the cost of this. Just get with Kat, who is your department lead, and she'll fill you in on the details. But we'd like to try to get as many people certified as we're able to. Again, we're extending these opportunities to you. If you want to get refreshed in CPR or learn to stop the bleed, we'd love for you to be a part of that. One last thing, Christmas at Red this year, we are already beginning to make preparations for this. You'll see that there are some awesome little gifts that are down here, and as I was setting them up, Dylan was telling me this is too soon, we still need another week, and I told him he's wrong because we want to get the word out. You guys, we wanted to feed 30 families for Thanksgiving, all right? And we ended up feeding 36 families, but we raised funds to feed 70 families. And so you guys went above and beyond, which was super awesome. Thank you, guys. And what we told you was that we would just roll that over into our Christmas effort. And so we are going to use the additional resources that came in to purchase stockings and all the goodies that go into the stockings. Some candy, Play-Doh, whatever the stocking fairy brings for the stockings. That's probably going to be Matthew and Meredith. Matthew, sorry. And they're going to be putting that together. And what we want to do is for every stocking that we give out, we want to pair that with one nice gift. So last year we just did stockings. This year we want to do stockings and a nice gift. And so when I was out shopping over the weekend, I went ahead and grabbed a few things as some examples, because right now is like these little weekends things like Black Friday, tomorrow Cyber Monday, and there will be specials throughout the remainder of December where you can grab something. What we're looking at is something that's between a $10 and $15 value. All right, and so like for instance, I'll give you my little Hot Wheels set here. Is normally $20, but because of Black Friday it was 10, and so it fell within the parameters of what we're wanting to do. Okay, so we're asking you, if you will, grab a generalized ages, because we can't really get specifics down in time. Boy, girl, different ages. Grab a gift that would work, and bring that here on Sundays over the course of the next couple of weeks. We'll be announcing a wrapping day where some of us will beatbox and some of us will put paper on the boxes. Kenneth's got the beatboxing down, and we'll get these things ready and prepped, but we need them to come unwrapped because we need to be able to see what they are so that we can pair them appropriately to the right family. And we'll also let you know when we'll be handing these out. So if you're interested in being a part of that, you can be a part of handing these out to the families and helping to make a child's Christmas a little special. So $10 to $15 gift, bring those to the church. You can bring them during the week if you like. We'll definitely be taking them on Sundays, and we need to begin that immediately. So keep that in mind when you're out walking around shopping through Target, Walmart, or wherever it is you do, Amazon, whatever, and grab something along the lines of what you see right here. That's coming up, and just like we're 30 days out from Christmas. How do I know that? Because my kids are asking Google every morning, how many days till Christmas? And Google is telling them the countdown, all right? So we're really, really close, and it's just an exciting opportunity to be a part of spreading a little Christmas cheer and being light in the darkness. Like I said earlier, we want to be about not church within the four walls, but the church that is in our city, in our community. All right, so opportunity right there for you. And now we're going to be in week 2 of First Fruits, and I just want to say something that I don't typically do, and I just want to give a shout out to people who are online. And if you are away for any reason, maybe you are on vacation or you're not feeling well, you have the opportunity to log in to Facebook or on YouTube and watch the live stream of the service that is here. And we have these conversations. It's not like we have hundreds of people who are watching at any given time. But we don't make the investment of time and resources because we are thinking somehow that hundreds of people will watch. In fact, oftentimes it's just 1, 2, 3 people that are logged in and watching. But in the last 2 weeks, I have had 2 different people share with me stories that they were watching online. One of them was my mom. So Mom, if you're watching, thanks for watching. And the other is a young man who is in the military who just went through boot camp and has not been able to get to church. And so he was able to watch on his phone and said it really made a huge impact in his life, the opportunity to be able to log in and check out what was happening and be a part of the service. And so I just want to remind you that that's a resource for you, and I wanted to give a shout out to those who are on right now watching. So we're in week 2 of First Fruits. My attempt here in doing a message on giving is to kind of break the mold. First of all, I shared with you last week that I get really uncomfortable when it comes to talking about where babies come from and money. Those are just 2 things from the platform. I see some of you looking around like right now, like, where do babies come from? I'm not going to be able to help you with that, all right? But I am going to be able to help you today with some of the money talk. So it's not my favorite thing to talk about, and I'll tell you why. Because it's one of those things that, like, in our society almost has a stigma to it now that, oh no, at church we're going to go and all they're going to do is hound us for money. And so instead of coming up here and trying to tell you reasons why you should give, my heart was stirred based on information that was shared with me a few months ago to really take a look at a Jewish philosophy of what it looks like to just be a giver, all right? And if your heart is stirred, and I believe it should be, because I believe it's the responsibility of the Christian, the responsibility of the believer to be givers and to be investing in the local church to make a difference, then hopefully you'll be encouraged to do so. And so last week, I launched out the idea that if we are created in the image of God, right, then part of who we are innately, like at the very core, the depths of who we are is is we are givers. Why is that? Because God within his image is a giver. And from the beginning of time, he has given and given and given. And the greatest gift that he ever gave was that of sending his son Jesus to pay the price for all of our transgressions and our sins, to be the one that bore all the shame and guilt that we should have rightfully endured. And so God is a giver. And so to be in the image of God and to be like him is to be a giver. And today we want to continue in this idea of what it looks like to be a giver. And so, every week, you probably notice that I always start with a definition, right? And it's not that I don't think you understand what words mean, but our society does a really bad job at defining the terms. And so when it comes to politics, when it comes to finances, when it comes to entertainment, words can mean one thing coming out of one person's mouth and mean something coming out of somebody else's mouth, right? And so one day I was sitting around the table with my family, and my son Isaac was talking about being lit. And when I was in high school, lit meant that you were drunk or high. And so immediately I was like, what are you talking about? And evidently lit no longer means being drunk or high. It means like being awesome. And so it just goes to paint a picture of why it's so important to define our terms, okay? And so I always want to define our terms. So if you're listening to the message and you're thinking back, you can always go back to the beginning of a message and go, okay, so the terminology revolves around this definition, right? So give, to freely transfer the possession of something to someone, to hand over to. And so when we talk about being givers, we are talking about giving something up, right? There's no strings attached. It's not one of those little feather things that you set out with the hidden string, and when the cat goes to get it, you yank it away and you drive them crazy. We don't want to be those types of givers, okay? We're talking about letting go of something, no strings attached. In today's message, I've entitled The Actions of a Giver. So last week was the image of a giver. Today is the actions of a giver. So if we're created in his image, we're called to be givers. Now, what does that look like? How does that become practical, right? So the first characteristic I would say of a giver is somebody who is generous, right? And so this is going to be like where I want to kind of anchor in for a little bit is this idea of what it looks like to be a generous person. And so as we look at this Jewish philosophy of giving, they would tell you, and I listen to a lot of rabbis teach on this, and the rabbis always use this word. They come back to this characteristic of being generous. Like if I want to be somebody that's walking in the image of God, I want to be a good giver, I need to be generous. I need to be somebody that is not stingy and greedy, but somebody who is generous. So there's this characteristic of what it looks like to be a giver. And they paint this picture all the way back to Abraham. And Abraham, of course, was called by God out of Babylon, out of a pagan society into a land where God said, ultimately, this land will be your inheritance. It will be the inheritance of your children and your children's children. Abraham and his wife Sarah were both very old. They were past the years of childbearing. They had never had children. And God said, I'm going to open up Sarah's womb. She's going to have a child. So God just makes a tremendous amount of promises to Abraham. And what you see in the story of Abraham is that Abraham lives a lifestyle of being generous. He is not the type of person that's trying to build up his own wealth. Instead, he is trying to bring people alongside of him that can share in the wealth. And in fact, he brings his nephew with him, and their wealth is increased to the point, it says, that the land could not sustain it, right? They had so much livestock. They had so many people, so many families that were a part of the tribe who were reaping the benefits and blessings of their wealth, that the land could no longer sustain them. And that was the point at which Lot and Abraham parted ways, as if to divide their forces so that the land could sustain the tribe. And so Abraham was an individual who was very much committed to being a generous individual, and he represents this terminology that they use called tzedakah. right? And this idea of being a person who operates with tzedakah is being somebody who is generous, somebody who is a giver. And Abraham, alongside of God, established a method, a manner in which he would give, and that was to take a tenth of everything that came in and give it to the Lord. And so the instruction was a tenth of everything you gather from the field, you're to give it to the Lord, right? So we call this the tithe. And it's a traditional teaching in church history, even in the Christian church today. A lot of churches will teach this idea of giving a tithe, of giving first fruits, 10% of what comes in, giving it back to the Lord. Abraham was committed to doing this, but Abraham was committed to going above and beyond that. In fact, I think this really speaks to the ingenious nature of who God is, right? And that was that he had to invest back into the economy. He not only gave a tenth to the Lord, but he was to spend a tenth of what came in within Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem obviously not being established at the time, but within the kingdom. There was an expectation that he was to spend money among believers, and the Jews adopted this philosophy of spending a tenth of it within Jerusalem. What did that do? That guaranteed that Jerusalem's economy stayed strong. So instead of looking at their lives and going, hey, listen, I'll give a tenth to the Lord, but I'm doing all my spending on Amazon and allowing it to feed the economy of other major cities, right? They were committed to taking a tenth of what came in and guarding that and spending that in a place that protected the economy of the place where they considered to be the epicenter of their faith. And so they were taking 20% of what was coming in and being intentional about how they spent it. Right? And they did this out of a sense of obligation, because the instruction from the Lord was that they were to be tithers. And so obligation became a major part of the identity. A picture of how they, or why it was that they were giving, was because they were instructed to do so. They were instructed to be ones who did this. And so they would take their 10%. Now, I heard one of the rabbis telling a story about this idea of being generous, this idea of being somebody who practices tzedakah, and we'll talk more about it in a moment, but this idea of being a giver, right? And so you have a responsibility to give 10% of what comes in. Specifically at this time, what they gathered from the fields, they were to give 10% of. And so the rabbi said that he was sharing this idea, and then a few weeks later, he was sharing the story of the children of Israel in a season of wandering, right? They had been disobedient to God. The promised land that was to be given to them, that was on hold, and for 40 years they wandered, is what the word says. And during that time of wandering, it says that they had no place to call their own, and that what God did was, on a daily basis, he provided for them. And so each morning they would wake up and there would be manna, there would be food that was ready for them. And so the rabbi was talking about how, like, Jewish tradition, I did not know this, or was that this manna, when you put it in your mouth, it tasted like whatever food you wanted to eat except for meat. So if there was any dish that you had traditionally had and you wanted that day, they say that when the manna was in your mouth, that it actually took on that consistency and taste like that. I don't know if that's true or not. It's extra biblical. I found it fascinating. And this story of this rabbi telling it, and he says that he's telling this, and this kid starts raising his hand and is saying, but Rabbi, I have a question. And he said, hold on, let me finish the story. They were in wandering, and when he got to the end, he said, okay, what's your question? And he said, well, if God was providing everything for them, how were they practicing tzedakah? They had no fields, so how were they giving their 10%? And the rabbi shared the story because it paints a picture of how central to Jewish philosophy this idea of being generous is. That, like, it's so ingrained in me that in all circumstances, no matter what's going on in my life, no matter how good or bad it is, I am generous and I am faithful with what God has entrusted me with. So to the point that I want to be somebody who gives back. And how can that have taken place while God was providing everything? I don't have an answer for how that comes to be resolved, but I can tell you that it really spoke to me about the heart of somebody who wants to honor God and wants to be a giver. Now, tzedakah, when we look this up, it has a definition that says that tzedakah is charity, right? But it also says that tzedakah is justice. And so tzedakah is charity, but at the exact same time, it is justice, right? It is charity, it is justice. And these two words really, when you begin to try to piece them together and fit them into this single word, the rabbis say that there isn't a word in the English language that is able to translate and mean what tzedakah really means. And they use this idea of it's like magnets that are reversed and pushing apart from each other when it comes to English. So in the English, we don't think of charity and justice as being the same. And so they push against each other. But under a Jewish philosophy, it's like super glue. Charity and justice are bound together, right? And for them, it's a matter of perspective, right? So I have a $20 bill here in my pocket, right? Okay. And so to illustrate this, who in here would like to have 20 bucks? Somebody put your hands up. Yeah, I see a lot of hands. Tom, come up here real quick. Tom never asks for anything, so I think that Tom deserves this today. You guys give it up for Tom. Him and his wife, Savelle, they do communion at least every other week, sometimes multiple times in a row, and they set it up and prepare it for us for service. Thank you guys for doing that and serving the way you do. And I know that they're constantly praying for the church. They're really strong, faithful believers. So, Tom, I want to give you 20 bucks. Right? Now, let me just say this real quick. So I give him 20 bucks, right? And you see a picture of charity, right? Me giving him something and blessing him. What you don't know is that before service, I asked him for 20 bucks. And so I actually owe him $20, right? And so I just gave it back to him. Go ahead. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. So think about this for a moment. Like, think about how, like, in your mind, all of a sudden there was a shift in the understanding, right? I've got $20, I'm giving $20, and when your mind is thinking that I'm just freely giving it out, you're thinking, man, that's really generous, I'm gonna get 20 bucks today. Then when you find out that I actually owe him 20 bucks, right, and I'm just doing what's right, then you go, well, it was due him. And so this idea of being generous is about being responsible for paying what you should pay and letting go and giving unto your creditors, right? The responsibilities that you've entered into. And at the same time, it's about being generous and helping those whom you owe nothing to. And so when they talk about this idea of practicing tzedakah, they talk about not being somebody who's holding on to these possessions with such a tight grip as to not be generous. So it really boils down to how we view possessions. And so a Jewish philosophy of giving revolves around the idea that I actually don't own anything. 100% of what I have right now in my quote-unquote possession is God's. It's all been lent to me. I get to borrow it and use it. He's trusting me to invest it. None of it is mine. And so this becomes really central to this idea of tzedakah, this idea of generosity, is that why would I hold on and hoard something that's not mine anyway? It wasn't entrusted to me so that I would go and build up some massive storehouse of resources that are all mine. And so the idea is that I become consumed with the needs of people around me and the responsibilities or the commitments that I enter into. And out of this births the idea that giving is redemptive. I can tell you that this is really the case. I have heard so many stories, and we just don't have the time for me to go into them, testimonies of people who have been walking through terrible situations, marriages on the brink of divorce, or even on the other side of divorce, the loss of loved ones, children, homes falling apart. And then they go and an individual decides to take their time, and instead of sitting in a place of grief and hurt, they go to a soup kitchen and they begin a routine of feeding people who are hungry. And then they begin to talk about how their lives seem to be redeemed. That in the midst of giving things away, time and resources, somehow their soul began to be healed. Somehow, in the midst of that, they began to find redemption. They began to find wholeness. It's amazing how therapeutic it can be when you're in a really dark place to just go and to give yourself away selflessly of your time and of your resources. And what a difference the other side of that decision makes from the person who decides to drown their sorrows in a bottle. Because the other side of the bottle is either another bottle or death. And the other side of giving is freedom, a sense of accomplishment. And this idea of being someone who practices tzedakah, who does not look at my finances exclusively from the perspective of my own financial gain, but instead of God has trusted me with this today, how can I be generous? It is something that is therapeutic and redemptive for the individual. And I think that one of the problems that we kind of have culturally in the United States is that we have been so afraid to talk about giving from this perspective of obligation, of it being obligatory, to instead we just paint a picture of how it's really voluntary. And if we don't say that, people get offended and, the preacher's going to tell me what to do with my money. Nobody tells me what to do. And so we walk around and we dance around and we tiptoe around what the scripture says. And we paint this picture of how like being somebody who's generous is, it's up to you. It's between you and God. And this language that I use, because I won't lie, I do get nervous that I'm going to be railroaded in the lobby by somebody who tells me that they're offended by the fact that I said that I quoted scripture, that I interpreted a teaching that way. The concept here within the Jewish philosophy is that it's an obligation, that it's not something that as somebody birthed in the image of God, that's in pursuit of God, that we get to choose whether or not we are generous. One of the rabbis said this: greater is one who is obligated to do something and does it than one who is not obligated. This idea that it is better to be obligated and giving than to not be obligated and giving. And why is that? I really was looking into this idea, like why would you hold to this idea that it's better to be under obligation than not? And I heard it illustrated this way. Anybody in here ever been on a diet before? Come on, you don't have to raise your, I heard some amens, but you've been on a diet before, right? So at some point in your life, you will probably go on a diet, right? And you'll do it for one of two reasons. Either you want to look better for the beach, or you're going to do it for health reasons, right? And so the idea is I need to be healthier or I need to look better. So when we go into a diet, we're making a commitment not to eat certain foods, right? And not to eat other foods outside of certain quantities. So we do calorie counting, or we weigh our food, or we, no carbs, only meat, or just vegetables, or whatever it is. We find that rhythm that we think works for us, that allows us to be happy. And so we enter in, and January is right around the corner, and our nation will see just that's diet month right there. Like everybody's like New Year's resolution. I'm going to step in. I'm going to be healthier. This is my New Year resolution. And so people enter into it. Now, if you've been on a diet before, how many of you have ever cheated on your diet before, right? And it was, you were not supposed to have ice cream that night, but you decided, what does a cup of ice cream matter tonight? Or a pint, right? Okay, and so in our lives, we try to practice this idea of moderation and self-control, but then at the end of the day, sometimes we go, what does it matter today, right? Okay, well, it really matters, because that one cheat day can completely mess up all of the effort that you've put into losing weight. And so this is the perspective, is that by being in this position of obligation to be a generous person, I am consistently in a place where I do not cheat God. I am in a place where I don't go to bed at night with regret saying, oh, I really shouldn't have eaten that ice cream. It wasn't worth it. Or in this case, going to bed at night going, man, I wish I had been one of the ones. Like if I had given to the Thanksgiving meals, it would have been 75 families, not 70, right? Not having that regret. And there seems to be a disconnect for a lot of people. They'll identify with the faith, but they won't identify with the responsibilities that come with it. I heard another rabbi sharing a story of a gentleman that was very, very wealthy. He was Jewish, and they realized that this guy in the community talked about his faith, and he would show up at the synagogue, but he never gave any resources. Very, very wealthy, gave zero. And so he went and he confronted the guy, and he said, listen, you know, I have done my research, and I know that you own one of the largest homes in this city. And that's not it. That's not all. You also own a place to go skiing in Switzerland and a flat in Paris. You also own a house on the beach in the Bahamas. You have your own private plane. You're probably one of the wealthiest people in our nation, and yet you don't give one penny into the local outreach, into the effort here. And the man's response was, well, I assume that if you took the time to do all of this research, you probably discovered that my mother is sick, so much so that she can't take care of herself and requires 24/7 medical care. My uncle, her brother, is also very sick and can't take care of himself, and so he lives in a nursing home, one of the most expensive private nursing homes in the state. On top of that, you don't just have him. I have two sisters who married husbands that have never been able to keep jobs, and their kids are in private school. He said, if you think that with all of that in my life, and I won't do anything for them, why do you think I would do anything for you? And what a picture of the heart of an individual that would not even be generous to his own family and help them, but even brag about it. I remember being, I guess I was probably 9 years old. I was very, very young, and I had a Sunday school teacher who he was just really loud, and he was talking to a guy in the hallway about his kids who were driving, and he said, I'm not giving my kids anything. And I just remember hearing this. It just so penetrated my heart. He said, I'm not giving my kids anything. He said, I'm spending every penny. Their inheritance will be debt. I will die having lived my life to the fullest. And I just remember being a kid and thinking, ooh, like why do you think that way? You know? Like why do you think in such a way that you just want to leave your kids with nothing? You have no sense of generosity, no sense of creating a foundation or a platform for a better life in your children's lives. And that really births back to this idea of what it looks like to be generous. Are you looking out for the needs of others? Psalm 23, one of the more popular scriptures, begins with, the Lord is my shepherd, I will not want, right? And it comes to the end of this, and it says something that's kind of interesting. The very end of this passage says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Now, when we think about something following us, traditionally we would go like that's creepy. Like to be somebody being in pursuit of me gives me a sense of danger, a sense of being uncomfortable, of not feeling safe. And yet the writer here says, may goodness and mercy. Another translation says kindness, right? May kindness follow me all the days of my life. So when the writer here is writing, the writer is writing about this concept of tzedakah, of how that may goodness and mercy follow me. What type of mercy? Not mercy on me. This is how we read this and we go, oh, well, I pray that I always have good and that there's always mercy for me. But he says that may it pursue me to the point that I am a person who is good and is filled with kindness. The generosity is wired deep inside of me, and this idea of tzedakah is so ingrained that it might be said of me, and not just be said, but be said that it pursued me all the days of my life. Another great story took place during the Spanish Inquisition. The king's finance minister was a Jewish man, and during this time, the king saw a massive increase in finances, all right? But at the same time, the finance minister also saw an increase in finances, so much so that people who were close to the king became jealous of the finance minister. They saw how wealthy he was, and they began to kind of plot against him. And they came together and they began to kind of poison the mind of the king, that the finance minister was stealing, that the reason that his wealth had increased as much as it had was that he was stealing from the kingdom. And so the king brings the gentleman in and he says, listen, you have 48 hours and I want a listing of all of your possessions. Everything that you possess, I want that 48 hours, go get it for me. And so the finance minister comes back 2 days later and presents the list to the king. And so the king begins to flip through the pages. And the story goes that he looked at him and said, this is a lie. This is not everything that you possess. The estate that you live on right now is not even listed here. How do you defend that? How do you defend yourself coming in here and lying to me? And he said, listen, I'm not a fool. I know that those people who are close to you have been making attempts at maligning me. They've been trying to tell you that I'm a thief and that I'm stealing. And I know that with just the snap of a finger, you can go and take everything that I have. And realizing that you have the ability to take the home that I live in, the items that are inside of that home, all of the things that even my family has that we call possessions, that you could take those without effort. I decided I would be honest and write down the things that I truly possess, the things that could never be taken from me. And the king said, what do you mean by that? What do you mean there are things I cannot take from you? He said, those pages list all of the acts of generosity that I have done since I became your finance minister. These are the things that I've given away. And you see, the reality is that you could take my home and everything else, but you could never take away what I've already given. That is mine to possess until eternity. Does such a great job at painting a picture of having a heart of somebody who understands what I possess and the responsibility that I have with the things that I possess. Now, I want to just take a moment and be a little bit transparent with you, if I can do that. All right, so if you're a guest today, hopefully this makes a little bit of sense to you. I'll do my best. If you call City Church home, you've been a part of the process. So City Church was birthed 8 years ago. My wife and I both just divinely heard from God that we were to come to Savannah and start this church. And so in faithfulness, we prepared for a year. We moved here. We lived here for almost an entire second year, getting to know people, building a launch team, getting people together. And we launched 8 years ago in a storefront on MLK. And it was just a storefront with a warehouse building. Many of you were in that building. You remember those days. And we saw God do tremendous things. We exploded in growth. We had, at one point, we were running 3 services in there. And we had a lot of people who were driving in from Pooler, Rincon, Richmond Hill, and we just did not have space. Our volunteers were tapped, and we needed to do something. And so we made a decision to launch a second community in the Pooler area that would give those who lived in that area an opportunity to go to church a little bit closer if they so felt led to. And we were in the midst of getting ready to launch that. We had already taken possession of the space where Pooler is currently located. And we were just, I think, about 6 weeks out from launch date, and I was taking my family out of town. We were going to Washington, D.C., and we were just on the other side of Port Wentworth, about to cross the state line, leaving to go out of town, and the property owner of the facility on MLK called, and we were paying $3,500 a month, if I remember correctly, somewhere right in there. And he said, listen, Jim, you guys have been great tenants. We really love having you guys there. Y'all have done a tremendous amount of work into the space. I'll tell you that oftentimes when he was touring people around all of his facilities, he would bring them to our building, and I would hear him talking about how much we had improved the property. And he said, I just need to tell you that I just got off the phone with a guy that is ready to sign a contract, and he's ready to pay $9,000 a month to take y'all's space. And, I'm not the exclusive owner. There are family members that are in conjunction with this, and they want to move on that. It's a tremendous amount of increased resources for us. And he said, I just want to give you an opportunity to match it if you're able to. And there was just no way. We couldn't do the $9,000 at that point, even if I quit lead and went and worked another job, and so we ended up losing that space. We made a temporary move into the Savannah Theater downtown, and we launched Pooler one Sunday, and we had to relaunch Savannah the next Sunday, and we lost a lot of momentum in the midst of that. And there was a lot of prayer that went into that season of, God, why are we walking through what we're walking through? And even so, I continued to see God at work and believe that God was not finished with the work that he had begun. Ultimately, we lost the theater as well, and we had no location for Savannah to call home. Now, in the midst of this, when we moved to Savannah, I started a business installing TVs and sound systems, and so I would work in churches, I would work in homes, and I had been referred to a client and came into their home, and we installed televisions and speakers. And on the final day of install, the first time that we fired up the system, I always let the homeowner pick the song that they wanted to kind of play through, not presuming that they wanted me to put on, city church worship, and especially if they were in the house. And so they were in the home, and I said, hey, I'm fixing to fire it up. What would you like to listen to? What music could I put on for you? And he said, well, have you ever heard of Chris Tomlin? And I was like, yeah, I know who Chris Tomlin is. And so it birthed a conversation that they were believers and that I was a believer. And we ended up having coffee and developing a relationship. And in the midst of this, over the course of these years of losing the building, him and his wife, just great, amazing people, had spent time in prayer, praying for City Church, and constantly telling us they believed that God was up to something, right? And that God had a purpose for City Church. And he would do little things. They would make a contribution to the church, and it would be very generous. And I would always tell them, I was like, I don't even know how to say thank you. Like, this makes such a difference in our ministry efforts. And he would always tell me this. He would always go, well, it's not my money, it's God's money. And I genuinely believe that. He's just allowing us to steward it right now in this season. And so we're just trying to be faithful. And we were looking at a building on Victory that's actually about to become a paint store, Victory and Whitaker. And we were trying to get into that building to get Savannah relaunched, and it just wasn't working. And so I had called a handful of people in my life and just said, hey, can you guys just be in prayer? Like, this is just proving to be really difficult. And sent this guy a text, and he responded and said, last night my wife and I actually were praying before we went to bed, and we started praying for you guys. And he said, we really felt troubled about everything that City Church is going through. And he said, can we grab coffee? And I said, sure. And so we grabbed coffee, and he said, we want to help City Church find a building. And I said, well, that's very generous. We're very limited in what our resources are that we'll be able to what we can afford. That's why we're looking at the spaces that we're looking at. And he said, well, we want to make a donation towards the effort. And the family wishes to remain anonymous, obviously, but I will tell you that they found this building. We prayed about it. We fell in love with the facility, and they paid cash for the building itself. And he did that and said that the just over $600,000 was just a gift to City Church, right? That was just what they felt like God said to do. And I thought, well, that's great. This is amazing. And of course, if you were here and you saw the building, it was like, yay, God, right? It definitely didn't fit the vibe, the culture of what we see for City Church. And to add to that, they came in and said, here's what we'll do on top of that. We'll renovate the building as well. And so they came in, and all of the renovations that are in the facility, to the fire alarm, the walls, I mean, we have some images that'll be going online pretty soon that show the before and after, and it's drastic what happened inside of the facility. And they did all of that to bless City Church, right? And there are a lot of details that are involved in this, but a couple of months ago, I was just calling him, and I have a hard time talking about money, just in general. I have a hard time talking about it, especially when people help. Like, I have a hard time receiving aid. I have a hard time being in a place where I'm not able to do it, you know? And I was telling him thank you, and he was like, I appreciate how often you say thank you. And he said, but I feel like that the fact that you keep saying thank you is you don't understand why we did what we did. And so he began to present this idea of this Jewish philosophy of generosity. And he said, you know, your thank you comes from the fact that you believe that we were giving out of benevolence, right? That there was a need, we saw the need, so we wanted to meet the need. And he said that's not the case. We were not making these investments in City Church out of benevolence. He said, we believe that, and he talked about these 8 steps, which I'm going to go through, these 8 levels in just a moment I'm going to talk about. And he said, we don't see ourselves as benevolent givers to City Church. We see ourselves as partners. And he said, the difference is a benevolent giver gives when they see a need, and a partner says, I need to know the needs because I'm responsible for meeting them. I'm responsible for helping to make it happen. So he sent me this email about this man named Moses Maimonides. And so he kind of is famous among the rabbinical teachings right now. He lived in the 1100s, and he took this idea of tzedakah and he put it together in a way that he broke it down and said that people who practice tzedakah typically fall within one of 8 levels, right? So level 1 being like, this is the pinnacle of somebody who understands tzedakah from the perspective of Scripture, right? And level 8 is somebody who is just kind of maybe just getting introduced to it, or still searching things, working things out within their own heart. And so it breaks down like this, that they give in sadness. And what does that mean? That means that they see a need and their heart is broken, and so they give from a broken heart, right? We see somebody show us a picture of a little kid starving in a third world country, and we're asked to help to bring food to the table, and we give, right? So the lowest level of giving is given because our hearts are breaking, right? That's the lowest level. It's still a practice of tzedakah. It's just the lowest level, he says. The 7th is giving willingly but inadequately. And so a need that's presented, and they say, well, here's what we need. We need $5,000 to be able to do this. And maybe you're in the room and you're able to write a $5,000 check. It's no effort, but you operate, well, I want to give other people the opportunity to give. And so you give a little bit of money to the cause when you could, and you've been positioned to be able to meet the need entirely. You only give a little because you have a mindset that says, well, other people have got to help. And so this is the 7th level, is being somebody, well, I'm invested, I'm helping, right? But I'm not really meeting the need where I might have the ability. The 6th level is giving adequately after being asked. And so somebody finds out that you have the resources, and so they come to you and say, hey, will you help fill this need? I know you're able to. This is one of the reasons why I don't look at the giving records at City Church. And I say this pretty regularly. I have no idea who gives what unless somebody walks up and puts a check in my hand that I have to go and deliver. I have no idea who gives what at City Church. And I do that intentionally because I want to be able to minister the exact same way to each of you. If you call me at 2 o'clock in the morning and ask me to meet you at the hospital, I don't want to be in my heart more prompted to say yes because one person gives more money than the other. I want to be able to pastor equally to all of you. The fifth is giving tzedakah before being asked. And so this is the idea of really owning the generosity. And it's like, look, I know this is a need. I don't even need to be asked. I see that there is an inadequacy. I'm just going to go and meet the need. This is the fifth way. The fourth level is giving tzedakah publicly to an unknown recipient, right? And so this is where you would be willing to step up and say, look, I'm willing to step up and put this much money down, even though you don't know who the recipient is. Now, some of the breakdown of this begins this idea of investing like here in City Church, right? So we give you a need like the City Church Red and Thanksgiving, and you go, oh yeah, I'm going to give to that, right? But when you make general contributions, you're giving somewhere in this fourth level saying, like, I'm going to trust that City Church is going to steward these finances. And that's a difficult thing. It's a conversation we constantly have because, we might use resources because we're meeting with somebody who's in a position of great struggle in their lives. And so we go and maybe we pay for a meal while we're meeting with them. Or maybe we have somebody who walks in the doors of the church and they say, I've got kids, it's freezing, and I don't have power. And so we go and we pay to get their power on. And so there's like this entrusting nature that begins to be birthed in this fourth level. The third level is giving tzedakah anonymously to a known recipient. And so that just means that you know that there's a need, but you give it without anybody knowing that you do it. There's no record of it. It's not something that you gain a benefit from. You just are anonymously helping to make sure that a need is met, and it's a need that everybody sees. And so probably the testimony of that person begins with, hey, I was in need and somebody did something that changed my life. That's the third level. And the second level is giving tzedakah anonymously to an unknown recipient via a person which is trustworthy, wise, and can perform acts of tzedakah with your money. And this is where you move into second level, is where somebody would say, I'm going to invest in the church and anonymously do so. I'm not really looking for any benefit or notice. I'm going to just trust that that organization does what they're supposed to do. This is where we see right now people who don't even call City Church home. They attend other churches, some of them in our city, many of them out of state, that make financial investments into City Church. They're not even people that you will know. You'll know, if I said their names, I don't know who they are, right? But they so believe in what God is doing in this church, they invest financially right here. And then we're going to take just a second and look here at this level one, the top level. And this is what he told me. He said, my goal, my heart, our heart is to be this type of giver, giving an interest-free loan to a person in need, forming a partnership with a person in need, giving a grant to a person in need, finding a job for a person in need, so long as that loan, grant, partnership, or job results in the person no longer living by relying upon others. So here's the heart of it. This is the thing that I've got to say to you today, is I've got to say to you that right now, based on the income that we see coming in from the people who sit in the seats at City Church, we have more expense going out than we have resources coming in when we just look at what's given from within the four walls. And so if we were in a traditional scenario, a traditional setting, we would have had to have made changes. We would have had to have made some layoffs. We would have had to have tightened the belt and maybe even done less of our outreach. But a number of people who are invested from the outside have said, don't lay a person off during this transition. They've said, let us know every need. We want to meet those needs so that the church can grow. But for them, as level one givers, these people who operate this way, the goal is to see City Church grow to a place where we no longer need that outside financing that we're able to see growth and sustain growth from inside, right? So this is not a matter of me getting up and saying, oh, well, here's the truth. We're in debt to this or in debt to that. We don't operate in debt as a church, and we never have, right? And that's just kind of one of the principles. One of the things that we've really been proud to be able to say is that we don't operate with these bank loans that exist out there. And we've had rent payments, and we've had missions things that we've been committed to, right? Responsibilities that we've had like that, but we're not sitting here with millions of dollars of debt, right? And so I believe that we manage our resources really well and we steward well. And could we do better? We always could do better, 1,000 times over. No matter how good we're doing, we could always do better. But what I want to see happen here is I want to see us have an excitement in our hearts that God is at work. I don't want you to walk out of here today, because I was talking with Pastor Daniel over in Pooler about this. It's like the risk that we run by saying this is people start getting, oh man, we blah, blah, blah. No. This should be exciting. God is so at work and is stirring the hearts of people to help make this happen in such a way that the resources continue to come in each and every week to make sure that ministry is not missing a beat. That every month over at Red, we're feeding families. That when people are in need within our church, we're doing everything we can to meet those needs, to have the resources that are available, to be able to offer encouraging and exciting programs for families and opportunities for kids to know Jesus, for us to be able to do things, to be in a position to be an impact in our city, in our society. So the transition from Jewish philosophy to Christian application, it's really simple. I could have just put together a message on giving and just used scripture, right? Matthew 19, verse 21, Jesus said to him, if you would perfect, go. Sell what you possess. If you would be perfect, go, sell what you possess and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me. No one can serve two masters, Matthew 6:24, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. 1 Timothy 6:10, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and perceived themselves with many pangs. Verse 17, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on this uncertainty or of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. Verse 18, they are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. The picture of tzedakah, of being people who practice this, generosity, both in charity and in justice. People who are ready to be generous, knowing that God is the supplier and the one that will meet the needs. I believe that it is summed up here in Matthew chapter 6. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That which you treasure most in this life, that's where your heart is. And it's a great place to begin measuring the image in which you walk. Let's stand to our feet as we close. So this week, I have an excitement in me. I'm one of those guys, those Christmas guys. Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, the tree was up. We've already watched Elf, and Netflix had a new movie called The Christmas Chronicles. We've watched it twice, right? Christmas music is playing. My son Isaac's built an epic Christmas playlist for the house. The lights are on the house, the wreaths are up, the manger scene is in the window, right? The spirit of Christmas is in the air. It's an exciting time for family. It's an exciting time for friends. And I just keep thinking about the verse in Luke chapter 2, verse 11. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord. And this will be a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those with whom he is pleased. The timing of First Fruits was intentional as we roll into Christmas, an opportunity for you to be invested in the life of the church, not just with your resources. You may not know this, but December tends to be one of the biggest giving months of the year. And the idea behind that for most people is it's a last opportunity to take advantage of tax credits. And that's great. If you want to take advantage of tax credits for 2018, you need to have that postmarked by December 31st, or you don't get it, right? But hopefully you're giving from a position of tzedakah. And the reason that you're generous is not just because you go to church, but because unto us was born a baby, and his name is Jesus, the hope of humanity, the Savior of all. And we take time to reflect regularly on the sacrifice. But for the month of December, we take time to reflect on the birth and the coming of a beautiful baby boy, Jesus the Messiah. And so this month you have an opportunity. We're going full swing in Christmas. Our hope and prayer is next Sunday you walk into a winter wonderland called church, a place where the messages are encouraging and uplifting, a time where you invite friends and family to come. And on December 23rd, we are going to do something we've never done before. We've done some Christmas Eve style services. We're moving this to the 23rd, and it's going to be filled with music, and we're going to have the Grinch and elves, and we're going to be giving away stuff, and we're going to have fun as a family, because City Church is not just about Jesus. We're about good times with Jesus, celebrating the birth of the Messiah. May tzedakah be in your heart and take a hold of you this season. I want to pray for you as we go into song. Jesus, thank you for your faithfulness and your grace, your consistency in our lives each and every day. May we be people who model tzedakah, that the community around us would not just hear the message of Christ because of the t-shirts that we wear, the message that we proclaim, the prayers that we give before a meal. May they see Jesus through the way that we live our lives, being generous, meeting the needs of those around us faster than those who don't know you. And may people declare you as King this season because of our generosity. Amen.